My name is Brendan, and this is another video in my ongoing series on synthesis and sound design, and how to turn the sounds that are rattling around in your head into real synthesizers you can use in your projects. Today I'd like to tackle a pretty broad subject, but I'm going to do just a simple example of it. I'm going to be talking about pads, which are sort of a mainstay of synthesis, and sort of refer to a set of sounds that I think can be, it's more useful to think of the function that they serve, in a song, rather than, necessarily thinking about, specifics about, different sounds. Sort of the function that a pad serves is to sort of flesh out the melodic content in a song. It's, similar to like putting a string section behind an arrangement to fill out a lot of, chords and backing information. And it's, not a fast sound typically. It's something that sort of lasts a little while, often, comes in gradually, and is just generally, not an incredibly obtrusive sound, but just helps to really flesh things out and give, more information about, say, what the chord progression is, things like that. And, I think we'll make a pretty sort of bog standard example of sort of a string type pad that, you will have heard on countless different, typically older songs have this style of a pad. But I think I'll get into this, I'll dip back into this well a little bit later on in this series because I quite enjoy making pads and especially very complex ones. So I think, we'll come back to this a little bit later, but for now I just wanted to get a basic example out of the way to reference later on. So right off the bat, let's go ahead and keep our sawtooth wave up here. This I might turn into a triangle wave or something like that a little later, but I'm just going to start with the one oscillator for now, keep it simple, and we'll add as we go along. So we have our oscillator set, at least for now. One thing that we might want to do, and in fact we definitely want to do, is we're going to change the voices on this. And I believe I went over this a little bit in my Let's Make a Bass video, the evolving bass, but I think it bears repeating. So when we think of oscillators, typically, an oscillator by default has just one instance of this, whatever waveform playing at a time. So if I press this button, we look at our oscilloscope, we can see, it's just a sawtooth wave up here. It's exactly what we get, what we would expect. But one thing that we might want to do to take this from sort of a, fairly flat sound to one that has a bit more complexity is we might want to add something called unison or detune, chorus, all pretty similar concepts meaning the same thing. And basically it's just taking this from one iteration of this waveform to several. And instead of having them all play at the exact same pitch, they're very slightly spread apart from each other. They are detuned. And that gives what we call a chorusing effect, which will lead to sort of some movement in our waveform that I think we can just go ahead and take a look at up in the oscilloscope. I've taken this from one voice, meaning one version of this oscillator, to three, meaning that there's three now. And the highest and lowest ones are 10 cents apart from each other, which is a tenth of a semitone, I believe. Let's see what that looks like in our oscilloscope. So you can see in the waveform itself in the oscilloscope, there's a lot of movement, because of the interaction between these waveforms now. And this is going to create some, excitement and motion throughout our pad, which is going to be really useful and keep things from getting too stale. Sometimes you want a pad that's very static. There's often times when you might just, let's say, want like, a basic little sine pad to sort of fill things out. You get some sort of variations on this in some sort of more laid-back hip-hop or electronic tracks, often with a tremolo on them. Maybe I'll make that pad for my next thing. I'll make Monty Booker type pad. But in any case, that's not really what we want with this. We want something that's going to be able to change and evolve a little bit over time. And you know what? Let's even accentuate the unison amount here. So we have, let's say, up to 40 cents. I think 30 is a little bit more because you hear if we, really start to bring it up, you get this sort of pulsing sound that's very noticeable. And that's just not quite the sound I want for this. So I'm going to keep it relatively calm at 25 cents. So that's our very first oscillator setup. You can see I've adjusted the amplitude slightly already, and I'm just going to adjust it a little bit more to get more of a classic pad shape to this. I'm going to go ahead and turn my sustain down a little bit. We'll get a fairly slow attack, fairly slow decay, and fairly slow release. In fact, pretty slow for all of those. We're about 3/4, 2/3 up on each of these little sliders here. Let's hear what that sounds like. So this is something we might use just to sort of fill things out a little bit. It, is going to gradually come in. It's a very sort of soft amplitude envelope. We might, if we're sort of just coming in a bit more rhythmically, we would consider making the attack a little bit shorter. Which is still, that's still a fairly soft and unobtrusive sound. And maybe that's what I'll go with for now. I'll say this might be a bit more of a rhythmic sound. So next up, we are probably going to want to just go ahead and, well, let's actually use the filter envelope rather than the amplitude envelope. I think we're going to want to get a filter going because there is quite a bit of sort of, high-end buzziness right now that I just want to knock down a little bit. So let's hear it just with the filter. Maybe we don't even necessarily want movement. We just want to cut a little bit off, all the time. And maybe rather than using the filter envelope, maybe we want just a little bit of, let's get a noise LFO going. So this is, is going to still be a smooth change. It's not the steps noise one here, but it is going to be somewhat randomized. So I'm just going to map that to the frequency of my filter here. Let's hear what that sounds like. Nice. And maybe I'll get a little bit of key tracking here, just so that, now if I play, say, a lower note down here, it's going to cut off a lot of the high end, but if I play a high note here, it'll open it up a bit more. And you can already hear this is sort of an immediately identifiable cheesy sound. No shame in cheesiness, in my opinion. I think that this could be, there can be some beauty with a pad like this, and I think a lot of what can salvage this from being sort of a total cheese fest is how we decide to use some modulation to make it our own. So let's start to do that. Let's think about how we want to use some other oscillators and how we want to affect this sound over time. So let's maybe mellow this sound out a little bit by adding a sine wave underneath it. Maybe down an octave. And I am just going to set up a little chord. Can I reach? Yes. I'm just going to set up a chord on my key step so that I don't have to worry too much about, having the pad sound nice. So we have our little oscillator here. Maybe what we might want to do is, since we're not really using our filter envelope for our filter, maybe we can use it to control the volume of this over time. You can have it sort of fade in a little bit. A little bit less. And I think I want that to be sort of a pretty slow build here. So let's hear what that sounds like. Not quite so slow. Nice. So now we've got that set up. Maybe we'll get a little bit of, tuning control on the this oscillator just at a, sort of very direct level. So let's go ahead and get our mono LFO here. Actually, maybe we can do, let's consider doing the poly LFO. Reason being that I think I went over the poly LFO in pretty good detail in my modulation video a little bit earlier in this series, but I'll bring it back up a little bit here. The poly LFO affects each particular voice, each note that you play, differently. Rather than grouping them all together and affecting them all at once, the poly LFO, each time you press a new note, that's when this cycle starts. So you get sort of a mismatch between notes, even if you play them, sort of close to each other in time. You'll get a little bit of difference, between, when things are up, when things are down, for example. So that could just give a bit more character to our tuning knob, and it could, it could make it act a little bit more like a string section, for example, where, everyone's going to be playing the same notes roughly similarly timing-wise, but there might be some variation between players on when they're, moving up or down. So let's hear what it sounds like. I think that's sort of creating, you might hear it here. I'll turn this back on so you can hear. That's sort of creating a bit of like a thrumming sound between the notes that I do not find particularly appealing. And, maybe if I increase the amount here, it'll be less noticeable, but... And maybe, you know what, I can also, let's get it going on here too. And maybe slow it down a little bit. Okay, so that's that set up. I'm just going to add a little bit more stuff to this and then call it there. I don't sort of want to overdo things with this since, for now at least, this is going to be a fairly simple sound. Let's go ahead and map an LFO. Let's first hear what this sounds like. Yeah, I think I'd like to map an LFO to this mod here, and this is just, sort of mashing these two these two waveforms together. To create a, I think I'm going to take that tune off. To create a sort of new fusion. And it's a really nice thing to map to an LFO on a pad because you sort of get this, it can be a somewhat subtle change over time, just in the overall waveforms. Let's hear it. Sounds pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and mess with our feedback over here. Just to shift things generally down a little bit. I'm going to increase the amount of this filter, and let's add some distortion. Interesting. Gonna take that off. Let's go ahead and add some reverb on. Wouldn't be a pad without gratuitous reverb, would it? Gonna increase that to K. Nice. And I'm also going to throw on a little bit of delay, pretty fast delay at a pretty low mix. And what this is going to do is sort of just, again, it's a bit more of a chorusing effect. Whenever you have modulation, especially on pitch or filter or something like that, it can be helpful to sort of fatten up the sound if you add on a bit of delay. So it'll just add a copy slightly, past when the original played. And just thicken things up a little bit. So let's see what it sounds like. Very cheesy. I like it. So let's go ahead and end things by... Let's add just a little bit of sub in here. And like up here, I think I'd like to go ahead and get an LFO going to the shuffle. Let's get a fairly slow one. And maybe get that going to the filter envelope as well. Nice. And in my DAW, I think I'd probably go ahead and send that to maybe a ping pong delay, and a reverb I have set up already. You can hear what that sounds like. That's just to add a bit of width to it. One thing that Helm is unfortunately missing is it doesn't have a lot of ways to change the width of a sound, so I tend to add that on after the fact, which is especially good for a pad, which is sort of meant to fill up a lot of space, both harmonically and just spatially in a mix. Let's hear what it sounds like. I'm pretty happy with this. I think it is not too, it's not too, Dawn of Synthesizers, really cheesy string sound. But it's not, the most complex synth that we could make either. We didn't have to change all that much. So I'll probably come back to this, pad making a little bit later in the series, since it's something I like doing quite a lot, and I tend to go for rather complex pads in my stuff. But for now, I'll leave it here, and I will leave it to you to explore what else you can change over time in your pad. But that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.